Welcome back. Remember, we are still talking about the 2025-2026 budget, and I told you I'm not the expert, but on the other side in our KBC Garden studio, we have Wairimu Njenga. Wairimu Njenga, it's been a long day for you. What are some of the highlights for you when it comes to this year's budget?
Well, thank you, Cynthia Nyamai. As you have rightly put it, we are here to break down the 2025-2026 budget. And as you have been watching, we have broken down for you. We have looked at the gainers, we have looked at the losers, we have looked at the budget overview. And the 2025-2026 budget presents an intricate balancing act. And that you will hear from our experts who are joining me right here at KBC Gardens. And on my immediate left, I am joined by Robert Miner, who is a member of Public Finance and Tax Committee at ISPEC. And on my on my left, I am also joined by Helen Achieng, who is a tax manager at EY, and they will be telling us the spending record of 4.29 trillion shillings to support core sectors while avoiding fresh tax hikes. The strategy is heavily reliant on existing taxes, and that is based on the speech that the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, John Buddy, made: compliance, gains, and borrowing, particularly domestically. Now, with the ambitious fiscal targets and a renewed IMF engagement, its success hinges on efficient execution and public acceptance. And to break down to us, Robert Miner in studio with us here at KBC Gardens to just help us understand this budget that is kicking off from July for the next financial year, and also Helena Chieng from EY. Now, starting off, the government has unveiled a 4.2 trillion shillings spending plan, and 30% of this is going to debt repayment. Essential services like education have taken up about 28%. In your view, both of you, does this budget continue to the trend of spending beyond our means? Robert, let me start with you.
Thank you very much, Wairimu, for having us this evening. Now, at the foremost, I would like to say that the budget it's quite ambitious, no doubt about it. One of the interesting things that I heard the CS say is that they are aware that there are concerns in the general public that the government is actually potentially living beyond its means. So, one, I do appreciate that the government is actually listening to the people, and I do appreciate that there's concern among the general public that we are probably living beyond our means. Now, 4.2 trillion, and compared to last year, where it's a growth from last year. And the question is, since we have been saying that our debt levels are quite high, are we still going to continue the same trend where we are just having the increments on an annual basis without trying to rationalize and reduce some of the expenditure to make sure that we don't accumulate as much debt as we've been accumulating in the past? So it is a delicate balancing act, because once again, and I think last year something that we had the two committees in Parliament, because you have two very important committees. The one that looks at the allocations, the budgetary allocations, headed by Honorable Atadi, and we have the one that looks at the revenue side, Honorable Kuria. Now, we tend to focus so much on the one that is headed by Bona Kuria, that is on the revenue aspect, but we do not focus a lot on the expenditure. So at times, there's a lot of pressure from all quarters. MPs asking for more allocations, the judiciary, and among all the MDAs. So the balancing act, I know, is it's quite tough, but we are hoping that we can get to a point where we can get to balance our revenue vis-a-vis the expenses. Yeah.
Helen, indeed, our CS National Treasury did indeed say that we have been having unrealistic budgets in the past, and he said he has two-pronged approaches that he's handling this budget with, and one is zero-based budget and reduced revenue projections in line with the trends, also consistent with the economic projection. From where you sit, do you think this is a realistic budget?
Well, for sure, as Robert has said, it's definitely not a realistic budget, especially because we are looking at a 922 billion Kenya shillings deficit. So definitely it shows us that we are living beyond our means, and if we continue like this at the long run, it's not sustainable for us as an economy, and therefore we definitely need to look at it from a closer lens to just ensure that going forward we try and reduce our fiscal expenditure, because now we are at a point as a country where we are not able to increase taxes. We've reached a tax saturation point where any potential tax increase is met with resistance from the public. So from that end, we cannot count on that angle of raising ordinary revenue, and at the same time we're struggling with debt, which we're trying to reduce. So naturally the other area to focus on would be our expenditure. Can we now look at the inline items in our budget that would ensure that we only budget or project for what is very necessary for us as a country and for our economy going forward, as opposed to having inflated budgets year in, year out, and always having a deficit. And just looking at historical statistics, last year we also had a deficit of 701 billion Kenya shillings. You know, the previous year was also a deficit. So it shows that this is an ongoing trend that really needs to be looked at. And you've said something interesting about the two-pronged approach of number one, trying to reduce our debt in terms of now the fiscal measures that government is taking towards reducing the debt expenditure that we have as a country. This is just noting that about 1.3 trillion of our total budget is going towards servicing debt, which is really not realistic for us at this moment. So yes, it is unrealistic. We continue to budget with money that we do not have. You will talk about collections, I know, in this bulletin, but yeah, it's very unrealistic. Yeah.
Looking at the deficit, we're seeing a deficit of 923.2 billion shillings, and this will be borrowed domestically and also externally, but more will be borrowed locally.
Yeah.
So do we have a borrowing addiction as a country? You can share with us.
That's I don't know what I would call it an addiction, but yes, we do borrow quite a lot from the domestic market. And one of the things that I find as a country, and at times I do empathize with the government as well, because as a country, the economy that we have in Kenya is largely service-based. We really don't have a lot of revenue that might come from natural resources. You might talk of other countries in Africa or beyond where they could say, you know, they'll sell their oil, they'll sell their minerals or other sources to generate additional revenue. But in Kenya, it's a service-based economy. The other sectors contribute, you know, not too much because service contributes more than 50% of our economy. Now, the two options that we have, because we moved from a low-income country to a low middle-income country. And if you think about the grants that we are getting, I think from this budget we are getting less than 50 billion, if I'm not wrong, from the numbers I got. So we really don't get grants that we used to get many years ago. So our two sources is now debt and now getting the taxes. Now as to borrowing, from where I see it and comparing with other economies, borrowing is not as bad as it is, because even individuals do actually borrow for good reasons. But the question that we have always had is that do we get value for the money that we borrow? Because every country in the world, I mean, even in the US, they're having trouble trying to balance their budget because they also getting to a point where, you know, they're having a huge issue. So every country borrows, or most of the countries actually do borrow. The issue is we do have issues in accountability. People are doubting whether the money, when the money is borrowed, is actually being put into good use. So if we do borrow light amounts, we do invest in good projects that are going to yield benefit to the common mwananchi, and then we have additional taxes coming in for those development projects, then it may not be too bad. So we must also look at it from the spending perspective, whether we get value for that money.
Yeah. Our public debt is estimated to be at 11 trillion shillings and is projected to hit about 14 trillion shillings by 2029. Is it time for the government to stop ducking the hard fiscal decisions?
For sure. My opinion is that we really need to make very hard financial and fiscal decisions as a country to trim down that debt. Of course, we need to borrow. That is the norm in the global economy. A lot of countries borrow. But I think for Kenya, ours is more. We are borrowing more than we actually need, in my opinion, and we're borrowing more than we can actually sustain. Like, for instance, from last year March to this year March, our borrowing has increased by about 800 billion Kenya shillings. And when you look at the corresponding developments, expenditure that this money has, we can't really see. And a lot of people are now concerned that even if we are borrowing, we are not seeing the value for our money, right? So 11 trillion for me is quite high. And that's why I think I'm very happy when I hear the government saying that we are trying to reduce our debt expenditure, at least to bring it to about 5.5% of our GDP and even lower, which is now more sustainable for us as a country. Because remember, if we spend a lot of money, let's say, for example, a huge percentage of our GDP trying to service debt, and this is not even the principal, it's even interest on that debt, it means that critical areas in our economy, critical sectors are then being set aside, or critical developmental activities are being put aside for us to now finance this debt. Like, this 1.3 trillion Kenya shillings could have been put in better use in our economy to help the common mwananchi as opposed to servicing debt. So if we can borrow, right, borrowing is not bad, but if we can find ways to reduce that debt, and I know we are trying to do it, like now treasury bills and bonds are under 10% in terms of interest rate, then it would be more sustainable for us as a country. And even that projected 14 trillion shillings, we might not really hit it. Rather, we might turn things around for us as a country. And also, that just coupled with those expenditure rationalization measures that are being promised by government, we should be able to at least settle that here.
Sectors, Robert. Infrastructure has been given 217.3 billion. National security has been allocated 202.3 billion. Health is getting 138.1. Agriculture 47.6 billion shillings. From where you sit, do you think these allocations reflect urgent and socio-economic priorities?
Yeah, I'll say yes, because we have some key sectors in this economy. I mean, an Indian economy, health sector, for instance, the healthcare. Every Kenyan or every citizen deserves, affordable and decent healthcare. We've had a lot of outcry in terms of access to healthcare since we moved from NHF to SHIF. One of the key statistics that I've seen the CS pushing is that we have 22 million Kenyans registered under the new system, compared to, they were saying, 8 million under the previous system. That's a good number, and it's a good increment in terms of the people who are registered under the new system. So with that, if they do actually then manage to correct the contributions, because they are very high now, 2.75% is a high number. Okay. With that high number of people who have registered, that I would then expect that they are getting much more in terms of the contributions towards the healthcare. Because healthcare is being financed, for instance, from those contributions as well as the exchequer, what they are allocating there. Okay. So the services that we are getting there should be commensurate. Education, again, it's the key and the center of any economy. It helps to empower people. The most vulnerable in the society, you give them a chance to get out of poverty by giving them a chance to, to get education. So they are key sectors and they are good allocations. Obviously, they might say that they deserved more. Okay. But again, I guess we have a cake, and the cake has to be divided among very many people who are looking to get a piece.
All right, yeah. Robert. We'll come back to you, Helen, as you tell us the revenue collection targets and whether we are broadening the tax base, as the government has been pushing to do that. And that will, I'll answer that after we come back after this commercial break.
Well, thank you so much for that. I liked what Robert said. It's a tough one for government. It's a large cake, but has to be divided into many pieces. We will be going back to the analysis.